we go, but I think it's important we start off on time. So it's great to see so many of you giving up your time today to join us on this really interesting session we have planned for you. Just to give you a sense of the agenda, we've got some really excellent speakers lined up, and some of you I can see the speakers there already, which is always reassuring. We're going to run right through for 2 hours, and as well as all the speakers, each speaker will give you time to ask questions, which you can do through the chat function. Now, I'm assuming that many of you are very familiar with online communications, maybe with Zoom, maybe with other functions, but just to get us practice, could I just ask you to open the chat box up on your toolbar there and just send me a chat that says hello. This makes sure it's all working, ready for when we do the Q&A session after each speaker. You may also ask me or Salah any questions you may have as we go through this session, even if they're not related to the key speakers. One of the best things we have coming up for you today is a networking session. In fact, we have two, one very quick one in a moment and one slightly longer. This will give you a really amazing chance to share and connect with your colleagues and peers in this group today. And I'm going to get started with that in just a moment. If you have any questions about the event, please just fire us a Q&A in the chat box. Now, if you're familiar with Zoom, you'll know that it has this functionality called breakout rooms. And what this allows me to do is to put you into basically syndicate rooms, if this was a physical presence, and mix and mingle with colleagues that you're in the same conference with. So I'm going to do that just now to get started. And all I want to do is I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourselves to your colleagues. This is going to be done at random, by the way. So you are not being selected with anybody else. It's just complete algorithmic chaos. Introduce your colleagues, find out where in the world they're phoning or zooming in from, and then we'll get started on the session straight away. So off you go, quick networking, 3 minutes of magic, off you go. Excellent. Welcome back, everybody. So if you hadn't done a breakout in Zoom before, now you have. That's how they work. And we're going to be doing that a little bit later as we go through the session. All right. Good. All right. So what I'd like to do now is to hand over to my colleague Salah, who is going to introduce the session, talk through the theme today, and set the scene. So Salah, over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Graham. Thank you all. Well, that was fun, isn't it? You know, networking, that's what we're known for. That's the speciality about the MEMS World Summit and the camaraderie that we have, which is ever so unique. First of all, to our friends in Asia, I'm sending you a salute, a bow for staying up so late. I know it's 10 p.m. or something like that in Asia. Thank you ever so much for staying up so late to participate in this MEMS World Summit. To our participants around the world, thank you for being involved in our first webinar. Of course, I mean, you know, unprecedented times. I wish, and first of all, I wish and I trust that your families and yourselves are in the best of health, and your colleagues as well. It is really, really bizarre times. But we need to think in these situations of solutions. And when these problems rises, we always have to find different ways to support one another and to emphasize on this element of idea exchange, which we do very, very well at. You know, a great analogy is that if I have an apple and you have an apple, and we exchange the apples, we both have an apple each. But when we change this apple with an idea and we multiply this by 2 people, 5 people, 10 people, 30 people, 50 people, 100 people, it really, really shows and can result in something really, really invaluable, especially when it's done in a trusted network like ours. So I really just want to say thank you to all the participants here. A huge thank you to obviously the speakers who we have for this webinar. I mean, yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to this webinar. So I'm going to go through a brief presentation or PPT on what to expect in this webinar. So first things first, a lot of malarkey going around about Zoom and the security of Zoom around there. Fully understandable. However, we have applied measures on our side to ensure that this Zoom webinar is very well protected. So what just to let you know, this meeting that is happening right now, this is all encrypted by default. We've created actually a waiting room. So you must be waiting in a room and you have to wait for my authorization to be allowed to participate in the waiting room. So that's something to solidify the security of this platform. The host has obviously presented at the start of the meeting. I have the power to expel a participant. All participants, I don't want to do that, but a participant. So if we see any Zoom bombing going on to the next one. This meeting is going to be locked after my presentations. So as soon as Professor Dino starts his presentation, we're going to lock the meeting. And I've disabled all participants to record, so only I have the power to record, and under authorization of the presenters, I'll be able to share this recorded Zoom so you can share with your colleagues. The Zoom has been password protected as well, and only individuals with a given email domain are allowed to join. So all measures have been taken about, so rest assured you're in safe hands. So the agenda, as you can see, is very straightforward and clear here. So hopefully we should finish. This is based at PST, Pacific Standard Time, just so you guys know. So it's a 2-hour webinar of great presentations, you know, tremendous individuals that we have presenting, and then half an hour of networking, doing something similar that we just did just earlier on. Member partners, listen, I mean, these delegates, we refer them as delegates. Thank you for your support for this year, and you know, being a key representative of your company within the MEMS World Summit. Our sponsor partners, a sincere gratitude from my side and the team and the industry as a whole for allowing us to make this happen and for the rest of the year. Advisory board members, you know, without a doubt, You know, I salute every single one of them, from our chairman, co-chairmans. You know, these individuals have been very, very helpful in terms of guiding the planning of this webinar and the planning of our events for a significant amount of time. So a sincere thank you to every single one of you. I would go one by one, but I know I've got, my time is ticking. So the speakers as well, really looking forward to this webinar. And then our flyer, and then the event roadmap is here, clarified in terms of what's going to happen. I mean, I have to be honest, a lot has changed. There's so much uncertainty going on. So there may be a situation where we might have to hold this MEMS World Summit in China as a form of a webinar globally. However, rest assured that we will look at potentially postponing this event depending on how the lockdown situation goes for the end of the year, possibly around November time. The problem with this COVID-19, we don't have much research on it. So, you know, some people are saying it goes, it can come, you know, come back again. It's a very, very awkward situation. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to have a webinar definitely on June 15th and the 16th. Even if we go ahead with the physical event, we'll have another webinar in September and another webinar in November, or we go ahead with the physical event. But we'll do a poll. Of course, this is a consultative platform, so I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback as a whole. And of course, to our LinkedIn members, you know, if you're not following us on LinkedIn, we hit 6,000 followers recently. Sensational. Thank you for your support, guys. We're growing gradually. Clearly, we're doing something right. So yeah, I'm TikToking as the time goes. The demographics of this MEMS World Summit webinar, like I said, our friends in China, you know, and Asia just in general, thank you for staying up so late to be part of this webinar, and everyone around the world, thank you for participating. I hope it's going to be genuinely valuable. I wish I could go around with some Chardonnay and cheers one of you, but it is what it is. Yeah, so we have to make the most out of this virtual connected world. I know you're all IT tired for now, but at least when this is done, you know, we should expect more attendees coming physically to the events next year and physically embrace one another. And all other than that, thank you ever so much. Graham, I'll pass the control to your side. Thank you ever so much, guys.
That's great. Thank you, Salah. Fantastic. Follow that, as they say. So my first role is to introduce Dino De Carlo. And I just want to apologize in advance for anybody whose name I mispronounce. It's very fraught being British and not speaking any other languages, but Dino is an extraordinary individual. When I read through the CVs that I do of so many people, and you know, sometimes they struggle to find things to put in. I have a sense with Dino, he's left things out. He graduated from Harvard with a PhD and a BSc. His job roles and achievements are just too numerous. But what I would say, there's a phrase in his bio that just stood out for me, which is a technology entrepreneur. A true expert who's going to share his wisdom with you today. So Dino, I'm going to put your slides on the screen, and I'd like you to present to us this afternoon, this evening, if you would, please.
Thanks, Graham. Can everyone hear me all right? Thumbs up. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate it. You know, I don't see my slides yet. Are they?
Sorry, Dino, just doing this now.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll start off telling you a little bit about my background. You know, I actually spent a lot of time at Berkeley, at the Berkeley Sensor and Actuator Center. So we were doing a lot of MEMS related work there. But ended up moving down towards, not down, but moving towards microfluidics work. And I've been a professor at UCLA for about 12 years now. And I also involved in this center, which is a National Science Foundation Engineering Research Center called PathSup, which is focused on precision, advanced technologies and health systems for underserved populations. And so it's about diagnostic devices, continuous monitoring systems, but how can we make them cost effective for, you know, not just folks here in Los Angeles at these big university hospitals, but all these rural areas and underserved areas around the world. So I know that on everyone's mind is COVID-19, And actually, when Sala was talking about this apple analogy and the difference between apples and ideas, ideas are spread very much like the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19. And so, you know, that's the big challenge right now, and that's why we're all talking over our computers or phones compared to being in person. But I'd like to talk a little. I was asked to talk a little bit about the challenges and the technologies being applied to molecular diagnostics in COVID-19. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about that, and we could advance the slide. And so there's three main areas where these diagnostic devices are being used that address clinical needs. And so there's the first area, and I think probably what you've heard the most about, is direct detection of the virus itself. And so this is, most of these tests are detecting the nucleic acid component, and it's a single-stranded RNA virus. And they use a nucleic acid amplification test in order to amplify the signal from small amounts of that RNA in order to detect the virus. Why are we doing this? I mean, so there's some clinical actions, obviously, that based off of the ability to detect the virus, certainly quarantining individuals, potentially some of these experimental treatments. There's nothing approved right now, but there are a lot of experimental treatments that are getting authorized to being used. And then also indicate some of the clinical best practices, like how should this patient be treated if they're in the hospital? And so that's certainly also an evolving aspect of as we discussed earlier, that we still don't know a lot about the virus and what's the best way to treat folks that have the infection. The second area is in detecting the response of the immune system to the virus, especially the antibody response. And this is often referred to as serology. So we're looking for, in particular, two types of immunoglobulins, IgM and IgG. And those immunoglobulins, we'll talk a little bit more about them, but they're produced in response to the virus, and they have a time lag. So those are going to be a later stage than the presence of the nucleic acid of the virus. And there's other aspects of this. So one is to understand kind of the local herd immunity in a community. So you can imagine also testing individuals that are not sick to understand, you know, what's the protective benefit in this community. And maybe the ability to return back to work. If you had, these protective antibodies present, that person may more likely be able to go back to work, and also understand kind of public health sides of things, of the dynamics of the virus. Where is it in our community? And the third area is detecting not the antibody host immune response, but other activation of the host immune system. So what we see is that the people that end up dying from this disease, they die because their immune system is overly activated. And so that means the cells, the immune cells, different populations of leukocytes are acting in overly kind of a dysregulated way. And there's what's leading to some of that is the presence of abundance of cytokines that are activating these cells. And so the ability to detect that activation state is also important to be able to triage, for example, in the emergency department setting, potentially get some prognosis on the patient and even treatment selection, as we'll see. So if we can go on to the next slide. So the nucleic acid diagnostics for SARS-CoV-2 focus on, there's kind of three key steps. So I show a picture of the SARS-CoV-2 structure, or a schematic of its structure. And so in the case of the nucleic acid diagnostics, we're looking at the single-stranded RNA. We're basically, there are specific primer sets that that will amplify specifically the SARS-CoV-2 RNA. And so that is being used. So the three steps in the process are collection. And actually, you may have heard that one of the challenges has been collection, because first of all, it's a kind of a process that's either through a nasal swab. More recently, there's been a saliva collection approach approved, but those approaches are pretty inefficient, it appears. because it's difficult to collect enough virus that way. It seems like the best approach is actually putting this bronchoalveolar lavage, which is putting water into your lungs and then kind of sucking it back out, which is obviously not a very pleasant experience. Yeah, so some of the challenges have been getting multiple swabs. Is it a really negative result, or is it because I didn't catch the virus in the first place? And there seems to be even shortages of these collection apparatus. So that's been a challenge. And I think some of the 3D printing companies have also been trying to address that challenge. So after virus collection, the virus has to be lysed. That means broken up so that the RNA can be extracted. And we're also seeing shortages in the kits to do this extraction. So that's been a challenge. And then the final step is this nucleic acid amplification. It's mostly being done by reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction, or RT-PCR. It's a pretty established technique. There's one technology that's been approved for emergency use that's based on an isothermal amplification process by Abbott. And so the key here is that these techniques can really leverage an installed base of instruments that perform RT-PCR, and the only thing that you switch out is this primer set. So the understanding now is that the diagnostic performance is maybe less than 90% or so sensitivity, depending on the assay and how you procure the sample. So that means that if you're negative, that doesn't mean you're really negative. It means that there's a 10% chance that you're actually positive. And so what's happening is people are doing repeat tests in order to make sure, be really confident in results. And that also exacerbates the challenge with having enough tests. So we can go to the next slide. The second area is the serology. So in this case, if we look back at the virus, what we're doing is looking for antibodies that usually are targeting things like the spike protein. So that's the protein that helps the virus get into our cells through binding to the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor, or in some of the intracellular proteins like the nucleocapsid protein. And so different types of antibodies, depending on the patient, and there's huge heterogeneity, and each individual's immune response will produce different types of these antibodies. And so how these tests work is you collect blood. So this is not looking for the presence of the virus, but we're looking for, in your blood, are there antibodies to the virus? Most of those tests, there's only one test that's so sorry this is very US centric, but there's only one test that's approved in the US for emergency use authorization for serology. And then you have to get serum from the blood. You then you do some type of immunoaffinity reaction so that you're binding the antibodies in the patient to the antigens from the virus. And then you can do some readout based off of the presence of, and usually, well, the approved test and many of the tests for serology are some type of paper-based test, lateral flow test. The big challenge with this test and what we're seeing is maybe a lot of false positives, which means that patients that were exposed to other coronaviruses, there's a number of circulating coronaviruses that cause very minor disease. And those coronavirus, there may be cross-reactivity between antibodies produced against those coronaviruses and some of the antigens used in this test. And so that is a big challenge. And so we don't really know how well these tests work right now. And so that's something that there's definitely needs in improving the specificity of these serology tests. So we can go to the next slide. The final is diagnosing the host immune system and its activation. So the figure on the left is showing the response to the virus over time. And what you see is that you start with kind of these mild symptoms, and really when the difficult the symptoms that cause death occurs when the host inflammatory response starts to take over. And so tests that characterize this host inflammatory response are going to have two steps basically, where there's a blood collection, and then you look for activation of immune cells or cytokines present in the blood. And the idea is that the challenge here is to make this rapid turnaround so that a patient that's coming in, let's say to the emergency department, will quickly be able to determine, is this patient in one of the, they're down this route where they're going to have acute respiratory distress syndrome, and then going to have, basically multi-organ failure that follows that. And so these are the kind of the three standard, three areas where we have diagnostic needs. So if we go to the next slide. So you know, the first area, I'm going to show it a bit later, looking for the nucleic acid of the virus. There's actually a number of different technologies and instruments out there that are doing that, but there's only one, at least in the US, technology that's approved for emergency use authorization by the FDA for serology. And so this is this test from Cellex. And it's looking for IgM and IgG. IgM are early markers and because they are produced at early stages of infection, and IgG are kind of longer term immunoglobulins that are going to be at later stages. It's looking for both of these immunoglobulins. One of the issues is it's still only used in a moderate, what's called a CLIA moderate or complex environment. So it's not a CLIA wave test, which means it's not something you can use at home, for example. So these are still laboratory tests, even though it is a kind of paper-based, kind of like a pregnancy test. So there's a need for home-based or very point-of-care like tests like this as well. Yeah, so yeah, definitely questions would be welcome. So if we go on to the next slide. These next two slides are going to show what's known already about the FDA approved for emergency use authorization test for SARS-CoV-2. What you can see here is if you look at the test type column, almost all of them are PCR, right? And these are all basically polymerase chain reaction tests. They are using instruments that are already placed in hospitals or clinical labs. And basically they're just changing out the primer sets. There's a few that look a little different. You see the Abbott ID Now COVID-19 test. That's an isothermal amplification. That leads to a shorter turnaround time, as you can see in the result time. And so that test, but that test also is, that system also is a kind of a benchtop system. That's, you know, a $20,000 instrument. So it's not something you can distribute very rapidly. So maybe one of the challenges to highlight for the kind of instrument manufacturing side is how can we create kind of instrumentation that can be very easily distributed widely. You can imagine applications where even boarding an airplane, you would want to have a test done on all those folks that are boarding the airplane. But if you have these expensive instruments that are not easy to distribute and everywhere, that becomes a challenge. We go on to the next slide. You can see some more of these tests, and maybe yeah, that's fine. You can see that there's also a CE mark, which in Europe, and some of these LDT lab developed tests that are approved. Mostly that means that a hospital is developing the test in their clinical lab. So we go on to the next slide. You know, you can get more of this information actually at this updated emergency use authorization list, the bottom here. That link will go to all the latest emergency use authorizations. You can see that this is changing every day. So there's new tests that are coming out every day. And just to conclude with some main ideas, there are many viral nucleic acid tests available. These are leveraging generally this installed base of PCR instruments, but they're generally long turnaround time tests. You might be a day before you get results. There are a few of these low cost or point of care tests that have rapid turnaround time. So there's definitely need for more of those. It really might be an important part of restarting these economic activities. And there's few serology tests available that are not quantitative. These are qualitative. The only one that's under EUA is a qualitative test. And these need to be also made to be more specific. So these are also needed to help develop and test hypotheses concerning herd immunity and how that's going to help. So I think there's a question here. Oh, maybe not.
Okay, Dino, is that the right time to pause there? Yeah,
that's great. Thank you.
Okay, excellent summary, sir. So if you have a question for Dino, you can send it via chat, or if you switch to the gallery view, as it's called in Zoom, and you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself, introduce your name, and ask a question. I will then, everyone will be able to see the box illuminate, and we know who you are. So Who would like to ask the first question for Dino, please? Question anybody?
Hopefully it's not too scary.
I have a question as a non-scientist question, Dino. This testing, is it as mission critical as everyone in the media thinks it is?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that there are definitely clinical needs. So I think that so as I mentioned, so let's say that you want to test out a new therapy for a patient like this. You're not going to give that therapy if we don't know that they don't have this virus or not, right? So you do need the diagnostic tests to determine which therapeutic you're going to give to the patient. So that's number one. Number two, serology is important because if we know that, and still we're understanding that how long-lived immunity is, but if we know that someone is immune, that makes it more easy for that person to be part of the supply chain, right? And go back into, either go into restaurants or food operations or all these like critical operations that are needed.
Okay.
And third, for looking at host immune response, and we saw this in Italy mostly, the emergency departments were overrun, and so doctors had to make choices on which patients to treat and which patients are going to die. They didn't have enough information to know which patients had the most likelihood of survival based on their immune activation state. If they did, that would help them make those decisions.
Okay, yeah, I can see.
This is Alex. I have a question. May I ask?
Of course, yeah.
Sure. You talk about the difficulties of collecting samples, and I wonder. Just now, I saw another. Marcelino was also asking similar questions, right? Is there something that we can do in the MEMS community to help with the sampling, or improve the sampling accuracy, or I don't know, abundancy, or whatever that might be? So how can we help?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's the getting sample from, I mean, there might be some type of structures that are better at sampling from, so you can imagine that the swabs that are being used, they don't have they don't maybe get all of the binding to all of the tissue, the dead cells and things that are going to have the virus. Maybe there's ways to improve the material structure of the sampling and so there might be like microfabrication based approaches to improve that sampling. There's also potential for, like, say, concentrating sample. Maybe there's some type of approaches that can use MEMS-based technologies to improve the concentration of the sample once it's collected. And so that's not a big volume that has dilute sample, but the virus is accumulated in a particular location.
If I recall right, this is a problem with the corona symptoms where you really don't have a whole lot of sputum actually comes out of that. You have to really go in very deep into the lung,
right,
or get the mucus. And I was wondering, is there anything that makes this collection of mucus a more pleasant experience than through MEMS technology or some other things that we can do? And could be a structure, could be an aerosol of some sort, and then just sort of induces excretion of the mucus into exhale.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, if you improve, so what we do know is this bronchoalveolar lavage fluid. So basically you put fluid in and then you get it back out. That has the highest amount of virus that's collected. So you can imagine that if you have something where you're inducing more fluid production, you would be able to collect more virus from that.
Sounds good.
Good, thank you. Thank you,
Thanks.
Alex, for your question. Thank you, Dino. So excellent. Now, next I'd like to move on to our next speaker, Doug Sparks. Now, Doug, once again, a great speaker and a real honor to have him here, as it was with Dino. Doug is the Executive Vice President and CTO of Hanking Electronics. A lot of experience in this area, a lot of experience in this business. And if I didn't feel like an underachiever before, I do now, because it says here that he's published over 100 technical papers and has 47 patents against his name, with a PhD in material science and engineering. So, Doug, it's great to have you with us today. Same plan. I've got the slides here. Just tell me when you want to go through them. I'm going to share them with the group now if you're ready to start your presentation.
Sure.
Oh, let's go back one. Sorry, Doug. There we go. Over to you.
Okay, great. Hey, I really appreciate Sala and Cindy asking me to talk today, kind of update the MEMS World Summit community on how COVID has disrupted our supply chains, our manufacturing, and our business practices. Next slide. So, Dino talked about how COVID's affecting, the humans, how the disease state progresses. I'm going to more talk about how it's progressed through the industry. So, Hanking is a global company. Our headquarters are in Shenyang, China. And we started seeing the impact in the middle of the Chinese New Year, where we had employees, we had a couple employees wanted to fly to Wuhan to visit relatives. They were banned from doing that. Some went to the US and got stuck here for a month or two. We originally thought we'd have a 1-week extension of the holiday, and it turned into several months for a lot of people. So we're just now getting back to the office, and we're having to take precautions like wearing masks and not eating together at the cafeteria. So things are changing. That soon rolled out into our Italian design centers in Milan and Pisa. They're still under a lockdown, and of course the US in late March under the lockdown now as well. So next slide. Just a little bit about the supply chain and what it's done to us. Historically, supply chains are always in flux. Japan, had a lot of IC fab capability that went to Taiwan and South Korea because of lower labor rates and incentives. We saw, I was working at Delphi. We had facilities in Singapore. Of course, Singapore is now a high labor area. We have China, Vietnam, Malaysia. There's always incentives. There's always tariffs. Last year we had some trade friction that were finally working its way out in December, and then COVID hit, which threw everything into flux again. Some reports are saying that we could see a 30% reduction in smartphones, automobiles this year, some as high as 80 million device units. MEMS devices, start out basic materials, and I'm showing here in the bottom corner, an old Yole plot, and I'm sure Eric's going to talk in much more detail on this. It feathers out to, materials, mass, chemicals, packaging, final product, and the final product goes into the final MEMS product goes into the supply chain for our customers. And MEMS are just a part of that. But you can see if we would have an 80 million unit decrease, you multiply that by 5 or 10x for all the MEMS devices and units, whether they're filters, whether they're oscillators, gyros, etc. It could potentially have a huge impact from a demand standpoint. So, we hope that doesn't happen. We're sure we'll see a big pent-up increase in demand at the end of the year and next year. They're already seeing that in Wuhan. Once I think Wuhan was shut down for 76 days. Once that was lifted, car sales skyrocketed. They were dead before that. So we hope that happens in 2021. One thing about the supply chain, though, there were some supplier shortages in China early on because factories were shut down. Workers couldn't go to work. So that was an issue, and we've got to be more intelligent about how we supply things. Large companies like Apple, Intel, they have multiple suppliers and multiple companies, and that's something that we've got to move forward. One thing about the COVID impact is, that could be a multiplier in some regions, a multiplier against labor rates, incentives, et cetera. So we've got to look to changes in this as we move forward. Okay, next slide. So, I've worked in Asia for, over 20 years. I started in Japan, working in Japan in the mid-1990s, and Japan, Korea, those are all places where everybody worked long hours in the office. And suddenly, like a switch, it's remote working. So that's a big shock. It's a big shock in Asia. In the US, we might be a little bit more used to that, but it was a shock there. So, one of the things that's going to prompt, and I know, Marianne at South MEMS is always talking about, we're going to the cloud, go to cloud design. You need more memory. And this is really pushing us to adopt cloud IT infrastructure. So if you're going to have to work remotely and do MEMS and IC designs, you've got to have cloud access. So, that's a big change that's going to happen. Travel restrictions, travel restrictions, it's not just affecting conferences. We should have all been in Shanghai with Sala enjoying MEMS World Summit last month. But we're adapting. We're at this virtual mini conference, and hopefully we'll have a conference later in the summer. So, but travel restrictions affected fabs, affected MEMS fabs in a big way. So if you're getting OEM support for a tool startup or a fab startup, and it's coming out of Europe or the US, you may have a tool made in Italy. The team from Italy comes in to start it up. That's the travel bans really put a crimp in that. At first, it was a 2-week quarantine in an airport hotel, and you'd be taking some of those PCR tests that Dino talked about while you're sitting there. Now it's an outright ban on foreigners coming into China until this is over. So how do you adjust? And the way you do that is through local support. And companies like Applied Materials in China, and I'm China-centric because that's where our fab is. Applied Materials has a great facility in Xi'an, so they're really supporting the region. And there's other companies that do that as well. Remote support. We have tools that are remotely supported in the US, via the internet. They can troubleshoot things. And then there's just local indigenous infrastructure support that's been going on, in China for a decade. We have our own suppliers of CMOS wafers, but also SOI wafers, cavity SOI, glass wafers, masks, tool suppliers like AMAC, like, King Semi, supplying tools in China. So that softens the blow. So local support will be thought of as very important in the future. One thing that this taught us was that lean just-in-time management really failed in COVID. If you didn't have multiple suppliers in different countries or different regions, you could be in trouble. You could have extensive downtime in your fabs if you're relying on overseas maintenance support, or if you're relying on certain critical chemicals. So you're going to see kind of a reorganization of how manufacturing is done in various industries. I know Japan is supporting billions of dollars to try to bring manufacturing back to Japan. US will do the same thing. Okay, next slide. Next slide.
Sorry, did you go back?
Should be one more.
Yes, there's one. That one there. There we are. Sorry.
Okay, my final PowerPoint is financial impacts. We've seen both a supply and a demand shock in the semi and MEMS world. What would the impact be if we did have an 80 million unit reduction to our industry? It'd be huge. You've got say you have 10 MEMS devices in that. So that's a huge drop in volume output. So that's something that, we'll have to adjust to. And again, I expect a rebound in sales at the end of the year, and hopefully we'll make up a lot of that. There's liquidity issues. As cash flow reduces, we're going to have liquidity issues in the supply chain, and weaker businesses may have trouble staying afloat. From an M&A standpoint, last year was a pretty good M&A period for semiconductors. January was looking promising, and then by February people were getting nervous. In March, at least in the US, M&A stopped. IPOs were pulled back or clawed back due to COVID, just COVID. The equity markets went down. Some of the investment money's not there. So, you know, you could foresee insolvency M&A pick up at the end of the year as weaker companies are going to be acquired. So this is going to hit startups. You know, if a startup is venture capital funded, you know, they're in trouble right now. The government is supporting small businesses because of COVID in the US, and I know the UK, it's doing the same thing. But VC companies are not going to be supported by small business loans in the US. And you're seeing thousands of layoffs in Silicon Valley right now. And, you know, connected to government support is, you know, there's a lot of activity traditionally for the semi industry and MEMS industry in the past. You know, a lot of us have worked at startups and gotten government R&D grants. You know, I worked in the state of Michigan, and they had an MEDC program that supported local manufacturing. There's educational, you know, I think Dino mentioned BSAC, educational support as well. And there's going to be government support for small businesses and try to get us through this. And we've got to, as an industry, we've got to try to leverage that. And so, you know, that leads to lobbying, that leads to networking. SEMI's been active in lobbying for, you know, at least in the US, to try to get SEMI support for advanced technology and new standards. You know, MEMS World Summit, SEMI, MANSIF, IEEE, those are all places where you can network together and have conferences and kick around ideas. And I'm glad Sala was the first, you know, one of the first to seize on this virtual platform in response to COVID. And you're going to see that a lot. You know, IEEE was supposed, and I was looking forward to attending IEEE in Urshel in Japan last month, but it was turned into a virtual conference. So you're seeing that already happening, and it's just it's gonna snowball, and it's gonna be more virtual as we move forward. So get used to Teams and Zoom meetings and FaceTime, and, you know, using LinkedIn to kind of support this. So, you know, I'm just going to encourage everyone, you know, let's keep networking. Let's talk about new supplier relationships. Let's talk about M&A in the future, outsourcing ideas, you know, just keep networking. And I just want to thank Sala for, you know, putting this on. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to stop the share now, and I'm going to invite a couple of questions, please. Very thought-provoking talk, and yeah, the virtual world is one we've known about, but I think it's going to accelerate definitely. So can I ask anybody to ask a question, please?
I have a question for Doc, and
Alex, please carry on.
If I'm not mistaken, it seems like the Chinese government as well sort of put up some sort of loan with very, very low interest rate. I don't know how much that would be, to support some, especially service industry. I don't know how is that true also for the electronic industry or not. Doc, do you have any, because Hanking is a Chinese company, I'm assuming. So do you know if your company have a chance to tap into those kind of loans or resources?
Yeah, it's a great question, Alex. It's nice to talk to you. Yeah, I mean, China has, you know, been very generous. You know, China 2025, building all this infrastructure, you know, supporting memory fabs that are multi-billion-dollar fabs. And, you know, there's a lot of government grants, research grants, and you're correct, we are a Chinese-based company. So there are all kind of avenues, you know, to look into. And so it's really important to have a good team in any company, any company that has team members that are connected with the local governments. I mean, I worked at Delphi and Hughes Aircraft at the time, and they had 2 floors of lobbyists in Washington, D.C., just constantly lobbying. So, you know, not all companies can do that. I'm sure Citri's really good at lobbying as well. So, you know, that's a disadvantage to small companies, but if you network together like this and we can talk about ideas and kind of share them in our forum, I think, you know, we'll come up with something, a way to get through this.
Yeah, good answer. Thank you very much. Another question, please. Another quick question before we move on to our next speaker, if I may.
So I have a question, real quick one.
Please.
So do you see any changes in the way products are shipped around the world? For example, exposing them to UV light or something like that, so that things are more safe as they arrive at different facilities?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we think about every time I open up an Amazon Prime package. You know, we all think about that. And there are, you know, I'm seeing that more. You know, I just saw a video yesterday about this new robotic UV sterilizer that, you know, it's been on the market since 2015 and now they can't build enough of them. So that's going to happen. You know, you're going to think about UV, not just white balance with, you know, with alcohol-based solutions, but, you know, whole different ways of sterilizing warehouses, sterilizing tools. I've seen that for airline industry. You know, that's going across the board, and so it's a whole new ratcheting up, not just customs and logistics, but it's sterilizing logistics prior to coming out and then prior as they're received.
Yeah, yeah, we've got to rethink everything. I was talking to somebody the other day that was going to start looking at cutting down the number of people in a restaurant by half so we can social distance and increasing the amount of space in a supermarket.
Yeah, that's already happened in China when, you know, that's about a month ago, 2 people per table. So,
wow.
You know.
Wow.
So they've gone to putting aisleways in grocery stores in one direction, for example, so
Yeah.
you have to walk through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think yeah, as Ron was saying, it's going to go right down the supply chain, and technology will be the solution, not wet wipes. So,
yeah.
Fantastic. Ron, thank you. Doug, thank you so much for that talk. Super. If you have any more questions that occur to you, please chat them through and we'll get them to Doug to follow up on afterwards. Okay, the next speaker we have to bring to the table is Jeffrey Krotowski. Have I said that correctly, Jeffrey?
That's correct. That's very good.
Oh, my word. Lucky, lucky, lucky. Now, Jeffrey is CTO and Director of New Product Introductions at TDK Tektronix, another very distinguished industry expert. A lot of experience, a lot of technology background here. So I'm just going to hand straight over to Jeff, who's going to talk us through these points that he's got a perspective from his industry. Jeff, over to you.
Well, thanks everyone for coming and listening today.
Sorry, Jeffrey. Yep.
No problem.
Yeah.
So much of what I'm going to say is actually going to be complement exactly what Doug just covered. Going to give kind of a perspective. We operate here as a MEMS Foundry. There we go. You can see the screen now, hopefully. So we are located in Dallas. I think if we go next slide, get that going, you'll be able to see. So this isn't necessarily an advertisement, just more kind of where we sit on the MEMS network. So we have a 10,000 square foot clean room here in Dallas. Our key is we provide kind of medical and industrial sensors. And the key being here, our focus is kind of in that middle, medium level volume. So we're not trying to compete with the TMSCs that are working with the Apple and the high volume accelerometers. We kind of fit in between that R&D startup and kind of that high end, and that's kind of where our niche is in the network. So we can move on to the next slide. So MEMS is clearly a very intertwined business. So, between Asia, Europe, even regional networks, much of the medical comes here from Boston, San Diego, San Jose area for much of the technology. Unfortunately with the COVID-19 issue, we are seeing those networks degrade over time. First it was Asia, then it was Europe, and the regional networks from California or Dallas has even become a big challenge. So the degradation of those networks has kind of presented very unique challenges for us, and that's what I'll kind of cover more in the next slide, so we can progress here. Yeah, as you see, they have slowly float away. So first effect, how have we been affected here? So here in Dallas, we've been under since March a shelter-in-place shelter-in-place order. We have been able to continue to operate as we produce medical sensors, so that's given us a essential business kind of exemption to that shelter-in-place order. In spite of that, we've taken quite a bit of actions just to try to keep the employees here safe. Normally, if I wasn't on a webcam here, I'd be wearing a face mask for the employees here. Any of the technicians that aren't working in the fab, any of the kind of the admin staff, the HR, we kind of have them work from home. Even I'm working more remotely from times if I don't need to be on site. So we've encouraged that. We're monitoring employees daily for their temperature. Obviously we don't have the rapid testing that Dr. Carlo mentioned. So we're doing the best we can as a proxy for that. And fortunately for us, a clean room, where you're wearing your mask and protective gear is probably an ideal place to be. We feel like employees, we're doing our best to keep them safe, but even then we've kind of split out shifts, limited the number of people even in the clean room environment, just as an immediate reaction to what we're seeing here. Go ahead to the next slide. So one of the biggest challenges we've had here is just the equipment challenges, and it's kind of that's been the biggest impact to our Foundry. And it was kind of talked about previously, where the maintenance and a lot of it is based on a global network of field service engineers, either coming, you have the experts in Europe, the experts in Asia, even like I mentioned regionally, you have experts in Jose, and typically it's been you need to get them on site, they fly in internationally or they fly in from California, and it's not a big deal. That's obviously become more of a challenge, and it's caused us to kind of reassess how we have to manage our equipment moving forward. That's been one of the big challenges, and has resulted in more downtime. So in the next slide, I think I'll skip through this. I'll kind of break out some of the unique challenges we have. So one of the big things that we're going to reinvest or reanalyze is now when we do our CapEx and our equipment acquisition process, the ability to have local or even U.S. based field service engineers is going to be weighted much more heavily. Not to say it wasn't weighted before, but the idea of flying somebody in from Germany or flying somebody in from Japan was never a limiter. Now that may become more of a critical issue, where there is a requirement that the company that we're dealing with, even if they are based in Germany or Japan, has to have that local field service engineer support here. Having difficulties reading these slides, but in terms of that, so that's one, a big one. Another one that was mentioned was the IT and having remote support. So there definitely needs to have be able to remote into this tool. So the vendors are providing remote support. That's caused some more issues with IT for at least with TDK, and I think most companies want to keep things secure. They're not overly comfortable with having outsiders remote into the system. But we're going to have to put that spec in place and work with our IT teams and the remote companies to make sure that that is something that can be done, where they can monitor tools remotely. And then, just in terms of, buying redundancy, typically redundancy has been based on capacity modeling. We're going to have to redo that analysis and maybe buy redundancy, look more at what are our core processes that we need to keep up. And even if they aren't capacity limited, maybe we need that redundancy, because the cost of them failing and not being able to get parts in from Europe or Asia or wherever they may need to come from is too big of an impact on the business. So, it may be more of a look of what's a core process. And even if it's not capacity limited, it makes sense to do the CapEx investment just because it's too critical to what we do here. Go ahead to the next slide. In terms of other issues we've seen, in terms of clean room management, so obviously a lot of the same gear that we use here, the nitrile gloves, the face masks, these are the same gear that's going to be used, for the medical community and even the community at large wanting access to these masks and gloves just to keep themselves safe. So that's caused some challenges, acquiring face masks, acquiring the gloves from our normal vendors, and increases in prices associated with that. Chemicals, clearly a lot of the chemicals we use here are also used for disinfecting, the IPA, the peroxide. So a lot of the supply chains from the chemical manufacturers are being, they're seeing opportunity to get more money and, put their supply into the disinfectant type market and chemical cleaning. And that's made chemical acquisition also a bit of more of a challenge than normal. Go ahead. We can go to the next slide. Just stay on time here. Business impact. So really, it's as I mentioned here. The steal from Dickens. It's the best of time, worst of time. So you have your aerospace, automotive, industrial, and that's your worst of times there. I mean, you see in the news, Boeing shutting down, obviously with travel shutting down. That's going to impact Airbus, Boeing. And then all the suppliers for those are obviously going downstream, going to feel those impacts. Same with the automotive. So we are seeing a lot of slowdown, not many inquiries in the industrial, aerospace, automotive side. And a lot of these, manufacturers are asking themselves, how can we use these sensors and move them over to the medical side where there is, more of an interest? Can you use these temperature sensors, which may be for climate control or temperature monitoring? Can you use it for body temperature? The pressure sensors, can they be used and moved into ventilators? Now on the plus side, what we are seeing, if there's a positive of what's come out from here, is more of a shift and more inquiries and more interest in the medical sensor side. So we've definitely seen interest there. Even some of our existing customers are looking to expand. Look, how can we use this medical point of care chip that we have? Can we use it for the COVID-19 testing? Can we do protein detection, antibody detection with the existing technology we have? So that's been a growth area for us. Even some of the auxiliary features. So people who have diabetes or cardiovascular disease who are more susceptible to being at risk from this virus. So the devices that support those kind of detections are also seeing boom because we want, they want to diagnose those people, monitor those people, make sure they're as healthy as they can be. So if they do get this virus, they have the best chance of recovery. So really, we're seeing, from a business side, yes, the industrial automotive side is having a big impact, but the medical side is also seeing a boom. So it's really, two different tales based on the two different markets. And one last slide. So what we're seeing, even across the board is, huge increase in the demand for telemedicine. So, even doctors here in the U.S., they don't want patients coming to them. They want to diagnose them remotely. So one area where we expect to see a big growth out of this, even after, this initial wave passes, is a trend where you will see more, of a push to use telemedicine. And of course, if you're a doctor, you can only diagnose as well as, the data you have. So I think you will see a growth in sensors, kind of these two approaches where you have a lab on a wrist, you're at right now with your Apple Watch or future devices where you can get some of these metrics right off that, hopefully send it in the cloud, send it to a doctor, and then expand that and kind of get more interesting metrics for a doctor, things like cholesterol, even glucose incorporated on there. And more of a push to kind of lab on a palm, simplifying these tests. Obviously, a simple chip reader where you can get a COVID diagnosis or antibody reading in 1, 2, or less than an hour. That's a push. But even for markers like cardiovascular disease, things that may make you more at risk for having impact from COVID-19, I think you're going to see more of a push to get these lab in the palm, and the EMTs, family doctors, get that data, or even at-home testing for a simple device like that, where the data again can be sent to the cloud, and then the doctor can use that for kind of a telemedicine diagnosis and treatment. So I think that's all I have, just as kind of high level. Again, complementary to what Doug was kind of mentioned on just some of the general impacts we're seeing from this virus from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Jeffrey, fantastic. And a lot of information there in a very short time. So I do appreciate that. Just time for 1 or 2 very quick questions, please, or otherwise we can contact Jeffrey afterwards.
I have a quick question.
Please, John.
Thank you. So do you make SoCs for the devices? Like, for example, with a CPU and a Bluetooth light?
Personally here, no, we don't. We work more on the sensor end. You know, TDK does have some of that capability globally. Obviously, we're just a small part of a very large global company. But personally here, no, we just work more on the sensor chip.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Jeffrey, I have a short question.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, please. Alex, please,
Sure.
quick question.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, sorry. What kind of, when people say, I want to switch my aerospace pressure sensor or infrared sensor to medical, what kind of timeline are you thinking that can be done in?
Yeah, I think some of that is wishful thinking of, can this temperature sensor be quickly converted and used for, forehead, temperature sensor. I think they're just looking, that side of the business is shut down, that they're looking for anything. Especially anything that would require FDA approval. I mean, it's even in this environment, I can't imagine it be done faster than a year to, come up with a device, get it FDA approved, and have it, in people's hands. And that may be way over optimistic.
Yes, good thought though. But I read a report yesterday from McKinsey that said the key is innovation, and they cited an example that Nokia Mobile used to be a logging company before the bottom fell out of logging. So who knows? Who knows? But thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ron Klowski. I think I pronounced that correctly. I don't know. Ron, are you there?
Graham.
Yes, I am.
Yes. Who is that?
Salah.
It's me, Salah. Alex, you want to give your question to Jeffrey before we move on?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Alex. Yes, I missed you. Beg your pardon.
Yeah. So Jeffrey, Tronic is a very much respected piece in the MEMS community. So I was just wondering. Okay, so I'm sitting in China, and then when the pandemics first sort of started reveal itself, and the demand for thermopile sensor was astronomical. We don't even know why the demand was so much. So, and then, that's not really surprising. The surprising thing is that it sounds like we didn't see any like overseas suppliers of a very simple thermopile sensor. And I just wonder, is there, what's your perspective in this? Is that just people think this is not something, that worth doing, or is it just take too long to ramp up the production?
I think it caught them off guard a little bit. So, so TDK, at least from the temperature sensor, is very big in the automotive side, and that's been kind of their key business. And I think they just weren't able to react quick enough. And I think they've had this internal push, at least for that side of the business, to want to get into medical more. I think it just came on quicker than they were able to adapt. And I think it was just the speed at which it came on, and trying to, get in the business, get into those networks. It just wasn't a fast enough response.
So let me tell you, I was measured temperature. The temperature could be off like by 3 degrees Celsius. And then those temperature gun is still on the market, circulating and all that stuff. So just now, although we were talking about, it's tough to repurpose some of these sensors for, to deal with the pandemic, but I still see opportunity in that. If you got nothing as a measure, and then some measure is better than none. So I don't really know if there's still opportunity in that. So that's just my personal comments.
All right. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
So good. Let me move on to our next speaker, who is Ron. Ron, are you ready for us, sir?
I'm ready.
Okay. Now, Ron works for CNW. He's been there 7 or 8 years. I know he's a big fan of communication, big fan of customer centricity. He's also a big basketball fan and likes eating out a lot, both of which you're not doing much about, I imagine, Ron. So, which is probably why you're here, because it's the best option you've got. So let me put the slides on the screen, and I'm going to ask you to talk us through them, please, Ron.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. I don't know if any of you had a chance to go to Google today, but if you go there, you will see that they published a new logo that symbolized the appreciation to the couriers and the transportation industry at all. That I don't know how many of you expected a shipment these days or are shipping something, but as you can imagine, it's not as easy as it used to be. So let me present you what's happening actually in this during this time, during the COVID-19 attack in the world of transportation. CNW has been a leading transportation company moving urgent and critical shipment for the last 34 years, mainly for the semiconductor industry. It's a global company with headquarters in New York. I'm sitting now at the Tel Aviv office and broadcasting from here, where it's all it's a holiday and it's all closed. I was probably the only car on the road on the way to the office, but it's a pleasure to be here. Next, please. So, as all of you know, the world got attacked by a virus, and since then, many of the big cities, big centers, world centers are closed. Next, please. For the, we see that empty streets, empty centers, empty airports, and of course, big effect on the global transportation and airlines industry. Next, please. So as you all can imagine, the impact is dramatic since the huge reduction in flights, and the demand for travelers went down by almost 90 to 95%. So in the US, for example, just in the last few days, there are about 100,000 people on the different, moving in the main airports, while in normal days, there are about 2 million people flying within the US. So it's a 95% decrease. So the impact on airlines, of course, is dramatic. Some of them are trying to change and move a fraction of their aircrafts to support the cargo, as you can see in the picture. And we don't know yet what will be the future impact, but it will be dramatic. Next, please. This is a picture that was taken just before the COVID-19 in Europe. And you can see on the next slide, the impact and how it looks during the COVID-19. This is the next slide is from end of March. And today, during the April, it even looks worse. So if you look at Italy here and on the map, you can see that there are no planes over Italy at the moment. So if you want to move a shipment or you want to ship something to Italy, it's very challenging these days. Next, please. Here we can see the decline of main routes and main flights recently. All in all, the global air transportation is down by 70%, and some of the main airlines and main lanes are affected by 90 to 95%. Next, please. So we can see that Lufthansa, a major airline, cuts up to 90% of their flights and would only operate 20% of the intra-European flights. Cathay Pacific is reduced by 96%. And I don't know if you remember, but there were also before the COVID-19, there were some issues between Hong Kong and China that also impacted Cathay Pacific. Turkish Airlines suspended international flights. Next, please. You can see on the right the picture of the British Airways fleet on the ground. Not a very nice picture. Cuts capacity by 70%. American Airlines domestic flights schedule to reduce by 60 to 70% in April and 80 to 90% in May. And Singapore Airlines, over 3,000 flights were canceled. So you can see it's a major impact on the aviation. So let me tell you how it affects us. For example, when we are shipping urgent shipment from Europe or from Germany, and we need to fly to Singapore, just for example, and we look at the normal airlines we would use, and then we find out that every airline, they cancel their flights. Next, please. So we can see, for example, that we want to use Singapore Airlines, Japanese Airlines, Lufthansa, and all of them are actually canceled. So we have to invent the wheel every day and start from scratch and find the right solution to get on time. This goes the same when you go from Europe to US or from Asia to Europe and to US. So flights are canceled by the minute. Sometimes when the cargo is already on the flight and suddenly you are informed that the flight is canceled. So you have to rebook and find the solution right on the spot. Not an easy task to do. I can share with you a story that we had of an urgent shipment that went from the US and was supposed to arrive to a factory in Morocco. So the first leg was from the US to France. And from France, we were supposed to fly it to Morocco. But once the shipment arrived to France, we were notified that all the flights to Morocco are canceled. So we had no choice but to drive it. So we drove it until the ferry, I think in Spain, and then we moved it on the ferry to Morocco. So instead of taking only a few hours, it took a few days, like 2-3 days extra. So that's the impact on the supply chain and on transportation. Next, please. So the solution from the airlines that 90% of their fleet is grounded, they're shifting actually their aircrafts to move cargo. So cargo pilots are now more attractive. That's a joke, yes, but that's what's going on now. They're moving from passengers to cargo. Next, please. So that's how it looks like. It gives you a good idea. An increasing number of airlines are now piling cargo in the cabins for their aircraft in the hope to generate a fraction of the revenue they would have generated under normal circumstances. For example, American Airlines operated its first scheduled cargo-only flight since 1984. And many airlines, I see it all over. They are published that they have available aircraft for anybody who is willing to pay, and they are moving from anywhere to anywhere. Even though it's still not easy to find space on the flights. I don't know if you try to work with one of the big courier companies recently, DHL, FedEx, UPS. They are overloaded, and they have issues about employees with the COVID-19 in their hubs. So there are many delays, and beside that, the huge demand, increasing demand for medical supply, for masks that are filling those flights easily, mainly from China. So the demand is huge from all over the world. Everybody wants the mask, everybody wants the medical supply, and it's very difficult to find space on those, even on those cargo aircrafts. Next, please. Yes, okay, so that's how it looks like. We have the demand, the big demand for the mask, and you can see the productions in China, and the planes are full, and you see passenger aircraft full with cargo. Next, please. So that's actually contribute a lot to the increase on prices. So we could see that shipment that used to cost between $1 to $5 a kilo on a normal cargo is now increased by 3 to 5 times more. So it can be $15 a kilo to 20 and even more, $20 a kilo, just to move something out of, actually from anywhere to anywhere these days. But since China is back, a lot is moving from China. And the impact on hand carry, as you know, in MEMS, in the semiconductor industry, sometimes the hand carry is needed because it's a top urgent, because it's top critical, because it's high value. Sometimes it can be fragile or just a very prototype or something. Then this option is almost completely canceled now, because no, you cannot. I mean, we try to protect our employees, of course, but at the same time, it's very difficult to move passengers, because every destination that the passenger arrives asks them to be in quarantine for 14 days. So of course, it's not easy to accept. Next, please. Okay, previous one, please. So in order to meet this, can you please go one slide back? So in order to meet this demand, there is another solution, which are charter airplanes. And more we can see that there is a big demand for charter aircrafts. And companies like Atlas that provide charters, they are now doing quite well. So Atlas Air Worldwide arranged several charters to support the US medical supply. United Cargo supported the forces, the US forces, and Virgin Atlantic has operated its first cargo-only charter just recently. And there are many stories like that. I mean, also in Israel, the El Al and moving their planes, the passengers plane to charter now. Next, please. So, no, the previous one, please. Yes, so in C&W, our main solutions are normally next flight out, where we buy the premium services from the airlines in order to assure urgent and fast delivery. During these days, this option is very limited, but we still continue to do it. But we also generated our own lines for cargo, and we provide charter flights on the line from Chengdu to Singapore. Actually, we started by using Singapore as a hub. So Singapore, Chengdu to Singapore, Singapore to Chengdu, then Singapore to Penang and back, Singapore to Saigon and back. We have also Portland to San Francisco, Dalian to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to Dalian, and recently we also we started with a charter, daily charter from San Francisco to Chengdu in China. Next, please. So as it mentioned before, the impact from some of our customers and the big semiconductor companies is definitely a big impact, because their customers in the automotive industry are closing down. About 90 to 95% of the plants are closed, shuttered in North America, in Europe, actually all over. Now we see that China is starting to opening. We see that Austria is about to reopen soon, but the effect is major on the demand from the automotive and also from the aerospace for MEMS and all the semiconductor. However, next please. The demand is growing on other, if we look at other directions, because as we all know, we have to work from home these days. So we can see that the demand for laptops, computers, network is increasing, cameras, all related things to medical, financial, healthcare, and transportation, so energy. So everything is impacted and needs a semiconductor in there as a solution, and that brings the demand high on the second hand. Next, please. So we can see a sharp increase in remote, online, also in China, there is a big project of remote e-learning that they want now to be able to educate their kids while they're at home. Yes, so this is a good part for the semiconductor industry. That's why we need to find a solution for them. I can tell you that also the SIA, the Semiconductor Industry Association, have been asking President Trump to be defined as a key industry and key operator. And I think they will be given this because everybody understands it's really needed these days. Next, please. So what is our answer in the C&W? We keep working 24/7 all over the world in our main centers and supporting the semiconductor and all our customers while watching very carefully what's happening in the industry, adapting very fast on a daily basis, watching the flights that are canceled and the solutions that are in, and always trying to bring the shipment as fast as possible and door to door. We also, even though it's been really not easy, and there are a huge cost increase as I just described, we are trying to respect our prices with our customers as much as we can. And that's what we do in most of the lanes and with most of our customers. So I believe personally that we start to see the light at the end of the tunnel with countries like Austria that just started to come back yesterday. Even Israel is talking about coming back next week, slowly but surely. And I'm sure that more countries will follow. And hopefully soon we will be back to business in full capacity. So I would like to thank you very much, and I'm open for questions.
Okay, Ron, thank you very much indeed. Really good run through of where we are with all the transportation issues. One or two quick questions for Ron, please. If not, we'll move on to our next speaker. Let's stop this one.
Maybe I'll ask a question. This is Alex.
Alex, please.
So Ron, is there a sort of a designation of some essential business like these kind of courier service? Is that something that, you know, other countries actually classify certain kind of business as essential business? They don't really get subject to some sort of rules that sort of put up for other kind of industry. I think this, you know, courier is a very important thing to the supply chain of semiconductors. Was that not classified as such in your country or some other places?
No, we are classified as a needed industry. We are definitely.
Okay, all right.
Otherwise, right. I mean, we are supporting not just the semiconductor, but we are supporting the food industry, we're supporting the medical industry. So how can we do anything without companies like us?
Okay.
Indeed. Indeed, we would not have much of an industry without companies like you, Ron, absolutely. Good, now I need to move on, so thank you very much, Ron. Any more questions for Ron, please email them, message them through, and we'll get them to him. Our next speaker, final speaker today is Eric Mounier. Is that how I say that, Mounier?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, that's a lucky thing. Now, Eric is another industry speaker with just an outstanding track record. Over 20 years experience in MEMS sensors and photonics applications, numerous papers and reports to his name. You may have even seen him speak at other conferences and events. So really pleased to have you here today, Eric. Let me just load the slides up and then you can begin your talk if you would like to, please.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, right. Let's go back to the start.
Okay.
That's your first slide, yep.
Yeah, that's my first slide. So first, thank you for the invitation. Just for your information, President Macron announced that we should go back to normal in 1 month. The 11th of May, kids should go back to the school. So we hope that by 1 month, France will go back to normal business. So probably we will see more people in Paris, not like you can see on this photo today. So next slide, please. So just very quick overview of your development. As you probably know, we are a consulting company involved in photonic sensing, but also in semiconductor membrane computing and also power and wireless. We have been tracking the MEMS market and industry for more than 20 years now. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of all the MEMS company we follow. So we are regularly in contact with this company worldwide to have an update about their activity, the business, the new development, and their technology. Next slide, please. And there's the latest report we have on the MEMS market industry. So maybe the most famous is the Statue of the MEMS Industry 2019, so on the top left. And in maybe 2 months, we will release the Statue of the MEMS Industry 2020 with a new market data on MEMS. Next slide, please. So this is history. So before talking about the impact of COVID-19 on MEMS, I would just to show what has been going on last year for the MEMS industry. So this kind of scoop for this presentation, this is a ranking of the top 15 MEMS companies worldwide, how they achieved revenue and sales for 2019. So you can see on this graph that it was pretty good year. Some companies like Robert Bosch have increased in business mostly due to consumer for smartphone, wearable, hearable. Business in automotive was quite flat. There has been some increase in inertial, but they have been offset by pressure. We have seen a large increase in revenue for microphone, which has been benefit to many MEMS companies, just like Gore-Tex, Knowles, because there are more and more microphone consumer device, just as smart speaker, hearable, and there are more mic in smartphone. Also, some companies like Infineon or TDK also been increasing business due to mics. Some companies like Qorvo had an increase in revenue for BAW filter from a top tier OMS supporting 5G in China. And for example, some other companies like ST Microelectronics have a good revenue due to consumer business, for example, inertial and pressure in flagship smartphone models. Next slide, please. So now, what is the outlook for MEMS and for the industry in general? We are currently setting up at YOL some scenario for the future. So there are 3 different scenarios we are currently working on for the different market impact due to COVID-19. So we have got 3 cases. Worst case, that business will be back to normal in 2021. The middle case, it will restart early Q4 2020 or late Q3 2020. Or the best case, which was the business will restart early Q3 2020 or late Q2 2020. Next slide, please. So let's go into detail on these 3 scenarios. The worst case. So we assume that the pandemic will last all year 2020. And beyond that, there will be failure and slow effect of supply side policy of government central bank. There will be an incapacity of supplier to ensure the influx of order at the time of resumption of activity. The failure, slow effect of demand sustaining or demand stimulating policy put in place by government central bank will fail. And the financial sphere will also crack. This is the 4th scenario. We all hope it will not happen. In this case, there will be big trouble this year, a slow recovery of the business until 2021. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is the middle case. So we assume the COVID pandemic will last until the end of Q3, but the supply side policy of government and central bank will succeed. The supplier will be able to ensure the influx of order at the time of resumption of the activity, but there is still a slow effect of the demand sustaining or demand stimulating policy put in place by the government central bank. But the financial sphere resists, and until June, July, there will be increased business, and then there will be a slight acceleration and will be back in business early Q4 2020. Next slide, please. This is the best case. So the COVID-19 pandemic will last until the end of Q2 2020. The supply side policy put in place by the government and central bank will succeed. The supplier will be able to ensure the influx of order at the time of resumption activity. And more important, there will be increased household consumption. There will be on the rise again, and there will be some phenomena, we call it revenge consumption, that will be occurring in almost all sectors. We mean that after being locked down by almost 2 months, maybe more, we hope that people will go out to buy again smartphone, consumer goods, and so on. And the financial sphere will resist. In this case, there will be a restart of the activity early Q3 2020 or late Q2 2020. The fact is that this scenario will be different. I mean, the market will have different scenarios. Defense, automotive, consumer, medical will have different restart of the activity. Next slide, please. For example, maybe the worst case today is transportation. So we consider these 3 scenarios and we impact this scenario to the automotive and mobility case. So here we simulate the impact of a middle case and worst case, considering the air passenger transport and middle case for automotive on the sale for the transportation market. So on this graph, you can see the total in million units for air passenger transport, but also public transportation, passenger car, bus, maritime, light commercial vehicle. As you can see, for 2020, we can see there will be a big drop in unit, mostly for passenger car and light commercial vehicle, almost 30% less compared to 2019. And also, it will take something like 3 to 4 years before going back to a level prior 2019. It will be different for medical, consumer, industry, telecom. In telecom, for example, we see a big demand for server because everybody is working at home. So we need more and more bandwidth. We need more and more optical interconnect, more and more demand for server and memory. So probably the impact will be different. For industry and defense, here again, because we are on big program in defense, big national program, maybe the impact will be less. In consumer, it's difficult to estimate what will be going on. For example, we have some news today that the number of Apple revenue in China has been increasing by more than 100% over the last month. So probably the recurring consumer will be probably more quicker than what we expect, probably more quicker than the automotive for sure. So each market for sure will have its own dynamics. Next slide, please. Also, if we look at the MEMS device, some MEMS device will be very useful to cope with the pandemic, and they can help us to solve the current issue and to solve this pandemic crisis. For example, there will be still a surge in demand for MEMS sensor for infrared, thermopile and microburrator for temperature point gun, for thermal camera. They will be needed for contactless mass and fast temperature acquisitions to avoid contact with person and to control temperature of the people in airports, for example. Next slide, please. Another device which is very important to cope with the pandemic is microfluidics. As we saw in the first presentation, it's very important to have point of need, point of care device that can test the people. And silicon microfluidic can be used for that. So DNA sequencing devices, point of care, testing, PCR diagnostic system can help us to cope with the current pandemic crisis. We will need rapid mass screening and testing for COVID-19 patients. We need quick diagnostic. Point of care systems are portable, can be deployed on site without having to get sample back to the lab. And there are many companies which are currently developing systems for very quick testing. For example, there is Mesa Biotech, Qiagen, Q Health, Flux Energy, but also Bosch Healthcare, for example, and or Skywater, which is a US Foundry doing MEMS device, microfluidic chips. We are currently supporting microfluidic technology for MGI for COVID-19 sequencing needs. And also some other companies like 26, not involved in MEMS, but they're currently having a huge demand to speed up the assembly line for testing equipment, optical testing equipment for life-saving market. Next slide, please. Flow meter. This is another example of MEMS device can be very useful for the COVID-19 pandemic. Here we talk about silicon MEMS calorimetric flow meter for medical application. That's very useful for ventilator. And we know that we need a mass deployment of ventilator for patient critical dimension due to respiratory failure due to COVID-19. Next slide, please. So thank you for your time, thank you for listening. So please stay home and stay safe. If you have any question, you can send me question by email, but I'm ready to take question now. Thank you again.
Eric, thank you very much indeed. Excellent presentation. So can I invite a couple of quick questions for Eric, please?
Sure.
You may also, of course, email them or send them through chat.
Eric, indeed, this is Alex. Indeed, the sensors that you have presented represent a huge surge in market demands. And we have seen that in China. But let me just take a flow sensor or pressure sensor stuff as an example. And I've been calling around and asked for support in supplying of those sensors. And most of the vendors telling me that the queue is already into October. I'm just thinking, what is the outlook from the MEMS industry in looking at this demand? Is it really going to last until like October, or is it this is a faked demand?
There's a question. Eric, please answer if you can.
That's difficult. Actually, we don't have so much market data to share today regarding the demand for all these devices. One issue I see to answer the demand for MEMS could be some issue with supply chain, because for pressure sensor, but also for infrared camera, information device, some company are doing the sensor, some other are doing the assembly packaging, some other for thermal camera do the lenses. They are very different company, and wafer are going from one country to another for assembly, going back for testing. So even if the demand is here, we will need time to reset up a complete supply chains.
Yeah.
So that's also could be a critical. Supply chain is very important, and we are not used to work as we used to do before the pandemic, for sure.
No, good. All right, it's a very complex question, so Eric, well done on dealing with that. I would like to hand back to Salah, just to summarize and thank the speakers, and then don't go anywhere because we're going to go into a networking session where you can discuss some of the issues raised by our speakers with your peers here today. So Salah, can I hand back to you, sir?
Yeah, like I said, thank you to every single speaker. Professor Dino from UCLA. I mean, that was very necessity. We needed something from a scientific background on that perspective. So I really appreciate it. You know, Jeffrey from TDK. Again, thanks for the support. I know you came from last year and you're back again this year. Doug, I mean, there's no need for an introduction. Sensational as always, and I really appreciate your longevity and your support. Ron, thank you for giving us an outline on the logistics perspective, and hopefully that you give us a good outline in terms of the challenges that the industry's seeing from a logistics point of view. So I really appreciate your time. And last but not least, Eric Munier, fantastic research and an outline as a whole. Like I said, I think we're in unprecedented times, and if there's something that's uncertain, is obviously change, and that's the only thing that's constant. So that's something that we all need to take into consideration. Before I move on, Chairman Alex, is there anything that you would like to add? Is there anything that you would like to note to everyone here?
No, not really. I think tonight is fantastic. I don't know, this was put together just beautifully, from the logistics up to the end of the market stuff. It's just I really appreciate all the speakers, and then of course it's kind of late in China, but I still see a lot of participants also from here. So once again, thank you very much, and I hope this pandemic really goes away, and for our industry and also for our loved ones. So hopefully we can still have our meeting in later of the year. So thank you very much.
I hope so too. So again, thank you all. Thank you to the advisory board members, every single one of you, for making providing us with the right knowledge for us to deliver this webinar. So I'll leave it to if anybody needs any you can contact us directly. Thank you to all my team, Cindy, Elsa, Jubed, Kevin, Mia. Thank you guys for making this work. I mean, this is the first one, so luckily no technical problems here. So yeah, Graham, if you want to start the breakout networking. If I don't hear from you guys, thank you for your support, and let's keep in touch, as Doug Sparks mentioned, virtually